I just hit eternity and top 500 in the world on Marvel Rivals, so today I'm going to be sharing with you everything I learned so that way you can climb the ranks and do it too. If you're new to the channel, my name is Brush. I'm a former pro gamer, but most recently I've spent the last 4 years making educational Valorant content as a top 500 player. With that introduction out of the way, here are some of the tips I learned along the way to help my climb. First things first, let's talk about hero pools. In my opinion, one-tricking a hero is the easiest way to learn the game. Find someone you really enjoy, and with enough time on them, you're going to learn the ins and outs of how to play them optimally, which then allows you to focus on game fundamentals like positioning, target priority, and other aspects of your game sense. But the downside is obvious. If your hero gets picked by someone else or you get counterpicked by the enemy team, you're going to be out of luck. So what I personally recommend is having a main hero you specialize at while having 1 to 2 heroes in other roles that you can learn along the way to flex and fill if needed. For example, when I started playing, I only played Psylocke until about Diamond, and I was having a lot of success carrying my games until that point, but eventually I would get counterpicked or Psylocke would get picked and I would feel useless. So I started learning Mantis and Luna Snow for supports and Groot for tank. This allowed me to fill to help my team when needed, and eventually I pivoted fully into being a support player because I found I actually enjoyed support the most of all the roles. And after that, I started branching out and learning even more supports to have more flexibility in my hero pool. So to sum all that up, find a hero that you really enjoy and main them, but also have 1 to 2 other characters that you're learning along the way that you can pivot to if needed. Tip number 2 is to focus on your positioning. Positioning was by far the most important gameplay aspect for me to improve on personally, and that's because positioning is going to affect every single part of the game. If you're mispositioned, you're going to get punished and die, and if you're in a great position, you're going to be able to safely force enemy cooldowns, ultimates, or even get a kill, even as a support main. So what is good positioning? Well, it depends on a ton of different factors, including your role and your hero, but the general idea is to be positioning with intention and always have an idea of where you need to be to get back to cover or somewhere safe. A couple super common mistakes I'll see are something like a DPS running out into the open to do more damage while also being exposed to every single angle, or something like the support player running out into the open to try and heal that DPS. As an example of good positioning, look at this clip where we strange portal onto the enemy high ground. It starts off pretty standard. I'm sitting on high ground behind cover, behind the shield, looking down and doing damage onto whoever I can see. And then it starts with me dropping down, noticing my Iron Man might be in danger, but notice how I don't just run into the open to try and save him. I go around safely through cover to save the Iron Man, and then it allows us to catch the Doctor Strange out of position here, which then allows us to walk right onto the Iron Man and Cloak and Dagger for more free kills, and we secure the point. So to quickly sum all of that up, use cover, position on off angles, and have an idea of where to move if you need to reposition to somewhere safer. If no enemies are looking at you, then you don't need to worry about cover or where you're standing, but as soon as the enemies look at me while I'm at a weird angle, I find cover and move somewhere else. If you want to improve your positioning quickly, what I recommend is you find a game where you struggle to find value, watch the replay, and look where you died. Were you in the open with no cover, or were you too far forward compared to your team? Positioning is such an important aspect of the game, it's impossible to sum it all up in just one segment of this video. So if you want a more in-depth guide on how to position for each role, please let me know in the comments down below. So moving on, tip number 3 is to have as much uptime as possible. Now, what is uptime? Uptime is doing anything that is proactive. For example, doing damage before the fight starts, or forcing the enemy team to use cooldowns by using your own abilities, especially those that have hard CC. The opposite of this would be downtime, which usually means you're just running around like a headless chicken, doing nothing, or sitting around behind your team waiting for the other team to make a move first. In general, you want to be proactive, not reactive. Force the other team to feel pressured to make a move, and you're going to notice a lot of mistakes like wasted ultimates or positioning mistakes. For an example of what I mean by uptime, look at this clip here. It starts off with me sitting at an off angle, not just waiting for my team to move up, doing some damage to the enemy front line, repositioning to get a better angle and start hitting them from the side while they're completely focused on my team. I go back, make sure everyone's healed up, and then it allows us to catch this Groot completely out of position, not paying attention to his back, and that forces a cloak ult all for free just by positioning correctly and doing damage consistently. Basically, always have an idea of what you want to be doing and don't just sit around twiddling your thumbs waiting for the enemy team to make a move. Tip number 4 is don't be afraid to use cooldowns. A lot of people in lower ranks love to hold their cooldowns to try and find the perfect chance for a kill. For example, hitting a Luna Snow Freeze on an enemy duelist or support. This isn't to say to just waste your cooldowns every time they're up, but if you're waiting too long to use an ability, you might miss opportunities to force the other team to trade cooldowns back, force an ultimate, or even find a kill. Especially for support mains, I'll see people holding a Mantis Sleep or a Luna Freeze for the perfect opportunity instead of just using it when they get a decent opportunity. When I'm playing Mantis, I don't just wait until I see a duelist to use my sleep to secure a kill. I'm using it on the tank who's too far up, or I'm using it to save my teammate who needs help from a flank. Normal ability cooldowns are pretty short and they can open up huge opportunities to find kills or save your team. It's okay to hold them for a few seconds to try and counter something, but don't just hold them with no game plan and no reason. Tip number 5 is a small one, but it's also important, and that's to do damage before the fight starts. Doing damage before the fight starts allows you to pressure the enemy team by forcing them to use cooldowns to push you out of an area, or maybe you can get lucky and find a pick on someone who's too far ahead of the team. The best time to do this is after a wipe. Don't just sit around on the payload or sit around on the point in domination if you wipe the enemy team. Move up to a spot where you can get some shots off on the other team and do some damage before safely moving back to rejoin your team. The more space you can safely control, the more resources the enemy team has to use to get back to the objective. Number 6 is to focus on your target priority. Target priority is pretty broad and deserves its own video of explanation, so to keep it as brief as possible, my target priority goes supports, then DPS, then tanks. That is an ideal situation, which obviously isn't always possible. So the next best thing is to focus whoever's out of position. Maybe a tank is too far forward and they can't get healed in time, or maybe you catch a DPS on a flank and call your team to look at them. In general, you just want to make sure you avoid spamming the front line, because all that's going to happen is the enemy supports are going to heal everyone up and build up their ultimates if they aren't being pressured. So to sum it up, look for squishy, out of position, or killable targets like a low HP tank or an out of position support. Don't just waste time spamming the front line. So moving on to tip number 7, and it's not exactly gameplay related, but it's still very important for climbing, and that's to limit the number of games you play every day. If you're queuing up 20 games per day, it's going to be hard to play at your peak performance every single game, meaning you're going to be making more mistakes, you're not going to be learning from your previous mistakes, and you'll even be performing worse mechanically as you fatigue throughout the day. So what I recommend is playing just a few hours per day at most, where you can really hone in on how you're playing to minimize mistakes and maximize performance. Finally, we have tip number 8, which again is not gameplay related, but it's just as important, if not the most important thing I learned, and that is to focus purely on your own gameplay and mistakes. Not every single game is going to be winnable, but that doesn't matter. There are mistakes you make in every game, whether or not you win or lose. Focus on those, and eventually you'll be performing well enough to have a greater impact in your games, so you'll be winning more than you lose. What I personally like to do after every game is write down 1 to 3 things in a notepad that I want to correct in the future. For example, this was one day of games I played in GM1 before I hit Eternity, and I still took note of my mistakes despite winning almost all of these games. So those are the 8 things I focused on to hit Eternity and top 500 in Marvel Rivals. These aren't necessarily all going to apply to you. Maybe you already have great positioning or great cooldown management, but these are things that once I started improving and focusing on, allowed me to rank up into the top 500 players in the world. There are a ton of different ways to play Marvel Rivals and still rank up, but this is what worked for me personally. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments down below. And if you want to see more educational Marvel Rivals content, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to not miss a video.